Welcome to Financial Planning Explained. I'm your host, Mike Menninger, certified financial planner, founder and owner of Menninger and Associates Financial Planning. I'm pleased to have a guest with me today. He's an attorney. His name is Jon Groth, owner and founder of Groth Law Firm. And what Jon specializes in is a variety of different legal stuff, but property and personal injury and things along that nature. So rather than kind of blow it and steal his thunder, because I know just reading his profile, there's a lot of things that he is capable of doing and has the expertise in. So with no further ado, I'd like to welcome my guest, Jon. Jon, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, personal injury and all things personal injury is what we handle.
Well,
yes.
Good to know, because you know what? I'm going to ask a question that I didn't know the answer to. I think I probably do know the answer to, but I'm actually dealing with one myself. 41 years ago, I had an operation, and the doctor left a piece of gauze up in my palate. It was in there for 9 months, caused an enormous amount of damage. I ended up having 7 different operations as a result. It's rearing its head again.
Oh my goodness.
But fact is, again, that's after 41 years. There's nothing one can do to go back. Is it signed, sealed, and delivered? It's like a double jeopardy?
Yeah, well, not double jeopardy. That's a whole different area of law that I have no clue about. But there are certain rules, certain statutes, and I guess the legalese way of saying it is a statute of limitations. And the statute of limitations in certain states could be 3 years, sometimes it's 2 years. If you're going after municipalities, it could be as little as 120 days. You know, it just depends on the state you're in and where the negligence took place. There's also possibility of a thing called the discoverable or the discoverability rule. So was the negligence discoverable at the time, or is it something that it's rearing its ugly head years later? But even then, there's another legal term called the statute of repose. So all these things together really means, yeah, you're out of luck. Sorry.
So I guess what I mean by, I guess let me rephrase my question. If in fact I did successfully win a lawsuit, and then all of a sudden, you know, whatever the situation may be, you know, you're injured for a particular thing, you go through the efforts, you sue, you win, and then all of a sudden a new problem or a resurgence of the existing injury comes back. Is it sue once and done?
You have to include everything that first time. Okay. If you don't, you are SOL. Yeah, you are SOL.
Well, it raises another question. I have a friend and client who was in an automobile accident and really jacked her up pretty well. And it generated a lot of questions that I figured, hey, I've got you here, I might want to ask. So for starters, I think she's disappointed with how it's going. And because of that, does she have the ability to switch lawyers midstream, or does there come a point in time that it's no longer makes sense to do it? What's your thought on that?
Sure. So the rule is that the file is the client's. So the client can take that bundle of documents. You know, you say, or look at the old way of doing things. You look at an actual file in a filing cabinet, and that client can take that bundle of papers to any law firm that person wants to go to. So at any point in the process, you can move.
Oh, really?
When I started my practice in 2010, I had left another firm, and my theory was that my business plan was that I was going to go, and I did, go to a bunch of different lawyers in the area and said, I don't care at what stage of the case it is. It could be 5 weeks before trial. You can get me on board, and I will, take it to the end, and I will try the case. So that's certainly possible. It's not the best situation because you may not be able to find an attorney who wants to take on the case at that stage. Right. So it might be more difficult, but that's why it's important when you first start the process to know which questions to ask and understand which lawyers you're looking at and whether they can take the case from the beginning until the end.
Well, and I suspect that it's a business decision that you make as an attorney. If you look at a case, and if it's contingency, whether it be 33%, 40%, whatever the number might be, if you look at the case and say, well, I'm going to need to spend 100 hours on it and it's only going to generate $1,000 of revenue, then it's something you obviously don't take. But now,
Correct.
what
But
happened?
the way that I look at it, though, is you never know what's going to happen in the future, and the human body is an interesting thing, right? So there are cases that I've taken that I thought were going to be small cases, and rightfully so, or hopefully so, I should say, because the victim was that initially was not really severely injured. But then something happened later on where there was an MRI where they found a tear, and then there was surgery, and that small injury became something really much different, and the case changed. So I look at hiring a lawyer like having insurance or hiring a financial planner. You don't know what's going to happen 5 years from now. You don't know what's going to happen 6 months from now in your treatment plan. So if you have an attorney who can advise you, and then if things go bad, then you know that you're protected.
Well, that's what, in this particular instance that I was talking about, is, she alluded as to how much this case was going to be worth, which raises another question, because I think it was limited to how much the other insurance company had, as far as the other insured driver or underinsured driver, what have you. It's not generating that much revenue, where the amount of money that she would receive as a settlement is barely going to pay the past doctor bills, no less all of the future doctor bills. That seems unfair.
The most important thing that you can take from this conversation is protecting yourself with uninsured or underinsured motorist coverage. And if you own a home or you rent, having an umbrella policy on top of that. Because then you are in control of what that sum of money is. You're not reliant on what the at-fault party has as limits. In Wisconsin, for example, you can be fully covered, and I'll do big quotation here, fully covered, but only have $25,000 in policy limits. Well, a flight for life, a helicopter coming to save your life is going to charge about $20,000. So it's almost all eaten up just with that. So you need to make sure that you have the right coverage. So and again, this goes back to financial planning, when you're planning for the what ifs in the future, that you can protect yourself and be responsible yourself, because you never know who's irresponsible and driving the car across the street.
That's a very, very valid point. I appreciate you bringing that up, because I didn't realize that I could do that. So if for some reason, and this is going to get into, and I want to ask you about tort versus full tort versus limited tort as a separate question, but what you're telling me is that if I am seriously injured by someone who is underinsured or uninsured, that I could actually sue my own umbrella liability protection?
Correct. So you, through your auto policy, you will have uninsured or underinsured.
Right, that I'm aware of.
And uninsured is just if the other party stole a car and they have no insurance or whatever it is, and they are just driving with no insurance, then your insurance is going to step in the shoes of the at-fault party. And then I think that's significant, because then you are adverse to your own insurance, because they are standing in the shoes of.
Right, that's correct. I'm suing my own insurance company.
They ultimately will have the option of paying out to the victim, to you, and then they have to be adverse, because they're going to try to go after, hopefully they will, just for responsibility's sake, go after the at-fault party and maybe garnish that person's wages or go after their assets to get that sum of money back.
They're trying to recover
their industry. In the law, there are subrogation attorneys and subrogation companies that do only that.
Interesting. So, I mean, obviously the insurance company, and this is what I've learned all the way around, insurance companies don't like to give away money. And so when they're giving away their own money, they're going to want to try to recover it. So, but what you're saying is that the only way is through uninsured and underinsured on your automobile policy.
Correct.
And to be honest with you, John, from my recollection, when you're looking at property and casualty or your automobile policy, that usually your underinsured or uninsured motorists, usually like a coverage of maybe 100,000, 50, maybe a couple 100,000. With all due respect, John, that doesn't go very far.
Oh, not at all. What I often say is that I'm an insurance agent's best friend, because I can give real life examples of people who are either successful executives, I could tell you a story about one of those guys. I could tell you about a woman who had horrific medical expenses. She worked at as like a cashier and changed her life. And there are two different examples there. The one person, he thought he was covered. He was a high-level executive, and he had $250,000 in underinsured motorist coverage. Well, in Wisconsin, in my state, you have to compare the at-fault insurance to your underinsured motorist coverage. So the at-fault had 250, my client had 250, because it was equal. The law says, and I don't agree with it, but the law says that my client was not underinsured because it's not 250 plus 250, it's 250 compared to 250. So the max he could get was 250. And he had back surgeries upon back surgeries upon back surgeries that had to take place in the future, which those can, a doctor can charge $70,000, $100,000, certainly. Just the surgery can be really, really expensive, and then all the therapy thereafter is very expensive. So, you thought you had that you were covered with $250,000, but he wasn't. So that's why it's important in that situation to, if you're able to get an umbrella policy and have the umbrella policy tied into your underinsured motorist coverage.
All right. So
usually, sorry.
So that's what So if my umbrella is it an umbrella liability policy that would do it?
Correct. Yes, it's an umbrella policy. Like, for example, my umbrella policy is on my home, and I have that tied into, meaning that it matches the limits of my underinsured motorist coverage.
Interesting.
So if my umbrella policy is $1 million and my underinsured is $250, now I have $1 million in underinsured motorist coverage.
1 million, not $1,250,000. It's the higher of the two.
Yeah, well, and it depends. Insurance companies are all goofy that way with what they'll be able to do, and well, states also. Like in Georgia, for example, I know this because I have a friend of mine who's down there practicing law. They can stack policies. So if you have 3 different cars and each one's insured with $25,000 in coverage, you now have $75,000 in coverage if you're involved in a car in a car crash with one of those vehicles.
Oh, interesting.
So it's different than Wisconsin. In Wisconsin, you can't stack.
Well, so you also referenced, the cost of that executive needing to have multiple back surgeries, et cetera, et cetera. The other thing that comes into play is lost wages.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And where does that fall in?
In that situation, it's sad. The person had to go on Social Security disability.
Yeah, that's
and
unfortunate.
That was their income thereafter. Now, this is where you go after. Well, I say that again. I'm a good reference for insurance agents because this is where short-term disability, long-term disability, the AFLACs of the world,
yes,
those things, all those should apply. If you have them, you can use them in this, I guess, worst case scenario.
Right. I'm going to agree with you. I'm not a big insurance person other than the fact that it is a very important component of financial planning is to protect yourself. And last, before we go into break, I want to ask you, while we're on this topic, can you also talk about the difference between tort, with the full tort and limited tort?
Well, full tort and limited tort, I guess, in Wisconsin, it's either tort law or not, I guess, contract law. So I'm not sure about the difference between full tort and limited tort. That might be a Pennsylvania thing.
Okay.
When it comes to car crashes and things like that, there's a accident that occurs, and then you have a case against the at-fault party for tort law, or somebody else causes negligence. You could also have a first-party case or based on contract, and that would be, maybe that's what you're saying is a limited tort, because you have then the case based on your contract of insurance with whichever insurance company you have. And then that carries, I guess, different standards because there's bad faith that comes into account, and they have an obligation to abide by the terms of the contract as opposed to just simply tort law and whether things are proper, reasonable, those kind of terms.
So in other words, it wasn't as simple of a question as I thought it might be. So, for what it's worth, I personally, and I've heard horror stories of someone who had limited tort, got really maimed and was unable to sue the other person, at least in Pennsylvania, was unable to sue the other person. And if they got full tort, it enabled them to sue the other person, the other insurance company, what have you, for above and beyond the limits. And, for me, I mean, that's a big jump in costs, but I'm telling you, I pay it. And if you can afford to pay it, do not underestimate the value of insurance. And, it's one of those things that we say, again, we're not big insurance people other than the fact that we recommend that people protect themselves, but nobody has ever complained by saying when they needed insurance that they were overinsured.
Yeah, that's true.
Jon,
Very true.
I will be back with you in just a few moments. Please stay tuned. We'll be back with you after these messages.
Do you keep up regularly with your investments? Where exactly are your hard-earned dollars going? Are you financially prepared for an emergency?
I'm Mike Menninger, founder of Menninger and Associates Financial Planning. We believe that education and knowledge are powerful, and we want our clients to understand why we are making the recommendations that we make. It's your money, and you deserve to know where it's going, because it's not how much you make, it's how much you keep. So call us today to discuss. Welcome back to Financial Planning Explained, and I'm here with Jon Groth, founder of Groth Law Firm, and we had a couple minutes chatting during the break here, and kind of want to talk about a couple other topics between now and the end of the episode, which seems to go quickly. I wanted to talk about elder abuse as well as vaccine injuries in light of all of the vaccinations going on, and people, there's two sides of the coin, and it's not intended to be political, but I do also have a client who is seriously injured from a vaccine from many years ago, and he was very high up the food chain at his corporation, and he's disabled. So can you talk to us about vaccine injuries? Very, very little known. If it wasn't for this client, I didn't even know it existed. Please talk to me about the subject.
Sure, I can tell you, I didn't know it existed until just a few years ago. We were lucky enough to combine with purchase another law firm, and that law firm had staff that all they did was vaccine cases. And then when I investigated that, I had to Google and go and say, what's a flu vaccine case? So it started back in the 1980s when vaccines were more prevalent, and there was the goal to try to get more people to take them. So you're going to try to figure out, in the government's mind, how you can make it a lower barrier of entry. And the fear of getting the vaccine, not knowing what's going to happen, was there certainly. So 75 cents approximately of every vaccine went into this fund. And there's a Vaccine Injury Compensation Fund. It's the program that the vaccine manufacturers put this money in, and now I don't know how many billions of dollars are in there, but it's many billions of dollars are there. And that fund is, it's managed by the federal government. There are administrative law judges and Department of Justice attorneys that defend the case. So in our situation, what we do is we are licensed to practice before the U.S. Court of Federal Claims. There's only one court in the whole world that deals with these injuries. And if somebody has, let's say, a flu vaccine, and they have certain injuries within a certain number of days, and they last for a certain period of time, then the case is compensable. And it's kind of that simple. You have to gather all the information, make sure you have proof that this is the case, and if you don't have your proof, then you're not gonna get your compensation. So there are no gray areas with that. It's got to be pretty black and white.
Yeah, I have to imagine that it is extraordinarily difficult to prove and I learned it, like I said, from the one client of mine who had a tetanus shot and was really beginning to show signs a few months later that, going to his doctor, he's having nerve issues and stuff like that. Nobody could figure it out until someone threw out, this could be a vaccine injury. And lo and behold, he never heard of it. I've never heard of it. And, so my understanding too to your point, that part of the reason why this was done, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Jon, was that they wanted, a lot of the pharmaceuticals were concerned about being liable for the vaccines, and the government stepped in and said, hey, hey, Mr. Pharmaceutical, we're going to make it so that you're not liable. We, as the government, is going to take on that liability.
Correct. Yes. So the pharmaceutical companies, that's why they put the money into this fund, and then the pharmaceutical company is, I want to say, off the hook, but they're not the ones that are getting sued, or they're not the ones paying out the claims. It's the fund that is paying out the claim, and the claim that's paid. There are different levels, I'll call it. There are table claims, meaning it's one that you meet certain elements, and then you're going to get compensation because you've met those elements. There are other claims that are off the table, and those are ones, kind of like your tetanus shot, where you have a doctor that says, yes, this shot caused these injuries. And if you have a doctor that says that, and if the federal government has a doctor that disputes it, then there's a judge who will decide which side is correct. And then if your doctor wins the day, then the fund is going to pay for not only your lost wages and your pain and suffering and those kind of things, but also separately, it will pay for all the attorney's fees. So
really?
You don't, it's not contingency, because you get your compensation, and then attorneys, what we have to do is we have to keep our time, we have to bill our time, and then after the client gets their money, we have to submit our time to the fund, and then the federal government looks over our time to make sure we were reasonable, and then the fund pays us separately. So it's really, it's a good program in that the client gets all the money they are supposed to get. That's unlike a car crash. With a car accident, attorneys get paid a contingency fee or a portion of the limits. So let's say the limits are $100,000. I'm going to get $33,000, and the client gets the rest. With the vaccine program case, if the limits are $100,000, or sorry, if the payout's $100,000, there are no limits. If the payout's $100,000, the client's getting $100,000.
Right, but
and then
now
the attorney gets separate funds.
But from your looking at it from a business perspective, and we're running low on time, I want to get to the elder abuse, but from the business perspective, do you take on that case? Because if there's risk of you losing, does the client pay you?
No, the federal government does.
But if the client loses, if you don't win the case, does that mean you just don't get paid? Or does the client pay you?
If we don't win the case and we have a reasonable basis for our beliefs, and we had a doctor who said we can petition the fund to pay us, and the majority of the time we get paid win, lose, or draw.
Oh, really? That's interesting. Okay, very interesting.
It's a fascinating. Again, I didn't know it existed. It's and there are not many lawyers in the nation who do this. We have clients who are international. We have clients who are in Europe, who are in Siberia. Because if you get a vaccine at any U.S. military base, you're in the program.
Interesting. So lastly, and I don't want to miss this one, you deal with elder abuse.
Yes.
That is a very sensitive topic, particularly in the financial world, albeit I believe that it should be, because the government is protective of, I hate to use the word 65 as elder, because there's a lot of people who will shoot me because a lot of people are 65, but they determine that as anybody, the government tries to protect you, which I think they should. First of all, I think the government should keep the heck out, but separately, too much elder abuse in the financial services industry taken advantage. But I think the elder abuse that you're talking about is not as much on the financial side as it is like in nursing homes. Could you elaborate, please?
Sure. And the number one thing we see with elder abuse cases or nursing home abuse cases is where a nursing home is understaffed. So when you're looking for a nursing home, there are programs. You can go at the STAR system and look online. Medicare and the federal government has a rating system for nursing homes, whether there are complaints. Every state has an agency that has to investigate or has to just monitor nursing homes. So you can go to that nursing home or go to that agency and then check your nursing home to see if they are a good nursing home, I'll say. But most of the time, what we're looking at is understaffing, because it's a for-profit business maybe, and if it's a for-profit business, they're going to save money by having fewer staff or not qualified staff. And the cases that we see are where somebody is left alone for too long and something bad happens. I mean, I've had cases, just sad cases, where somebody is left alone in the shower or left alone on the toilets.
Wow.
And left alone for long periods of time, where your legs go numb and you fall over and the worst case scenario happens.
Yeah, we don't want to know.
Those situations can easily be fixed if you had an additional, just a CNA or somebody who is the assistant to the assistant checking on individuals in a nursing home. But
Yeah.
that's the number one thing that we see.
Well, that's sad. Jon, you know what? This episode just blew right by. You've been very
Wow.
informative.
Yeah.
Only wish.
Thank you for having me.
It's been a pleasure. You know, you had sent over a thing to put up with your contact information. Unfortunately, apparently there was too much stuff jammed into it. So what I'd like you to do is slowly tell people how they can get a hold of you, your phone number or your website or what have you. Please do.
Sure. Thank you. It's really easy. It's grothlawfirm.com, Groth lawfirm.com. Jonathan Groth, if you Google Jonathan Groth attorney in Wisconsin, you'll find me. The number that you can call or you can text, it's 414-999-0000. So it's pretty easy.
That's an interesting phone number.
414-999-0000.
Excellent. Jon, thank you very much. This was just fascinating. I learned so much. And you had a list of a whole bunch of things to talk about, and we only got to a few of them. But you know, this, to tie this into financial planning, Jon brought up a lot of valuable points, particularly as it pertains to, we didn't get into it, but you know, if you're ever injured, you really need to think very quickly as to whether or not it is an actionable offense, because there are steps that need to be done very early on. But more importantly, one of the things that I got out of this, mostly as it pertains to financial planning, again, is do not underestimate the insurance coverage that you have through automobile insurance. A lot of people try to skimp out to get their automobile insurance coverage. The prices are down. You know, I could save you money on automobile insurance. Well, how do they save you the money? Not because the insurance is better, but because they cut your insurance coverage, and next thing you know, you're in the hurt locker. So, you know, that is certainly one of the takeaways, is make sure that you're adequately insured. Jon, thank you very much. I appreciate you being on the show today. Very informative. I wish you a wonderful day. And for everyone who is watching, I hope all of the viewers learned something today. And thank you for joining us. And signing off today, Mike Menninger, Certified Financial Planner from Financial Planning Explained. Look forward to seeing you for the next episode. Thank you.